If you've been around for a while, you might already know that my favorite dynamic on the show is between Joe and Adam. We've now arrived at the first episode that gives us a bunch of it, and I'm super excited to dig in. We open on a close-up of some pine trees because they have this beautiful place they're filming in while also getting to film in color, so they have no choice but to show off. Three men ride up on a ranch where a woman is home alone. It's subtle, but one of the men is shown to have some kind of gut pain that is making him visibly miserable. One of the men, who is called Red or Blackie... Okay, seriously? Why are we always naming this guy's characters after a color? Anyway, Blackie informs the woman that they need food and water for themselves and the horses and that they are hiding from the law. She tells them not to come into the house while she gets them what they need. Two of the men comply with the request, but Blackie tells them to wait for him. The other two warn him to stay out of trouble, like maybe he's done this sort of thing before. The woman, Vannie Johnson, played by Evelyn Scott, does her best to defend herself with a knife, but Blackie kills her anyway. He somehow convinces the other two that they will be in just as much trouble as him if they get caught, even though they seem to realize, at least at first, that they did nothing wrong. Alas, they all ride out together as the credits roll. In town, the Cartwrights are at the general store getting supplies. There's a rather large selection of sweetening in the form of several candies in big glass bowls. Hoss asks all three of the others for money, and Joe gives it to him, after some chiding that we've come to expect from Joe toward Hoss. We see a little boy staring in the window outside, and it appears as though they are all going to ignore him until Hoss takes pity on him and gives him all the candy he just bought with Joe's money. Joe seems to take it in stride and smiles. It brings up the first of many philosophical questions this episode. Is it still your good deed if you do it with somebody else's cash? It's all good. Hop Sing is presumably still on the show somewhere, so he'll make Hoss something for dessert later. As a side note, there's a different theme playing around Hoss than the one that we come to associate with him later, when he comes on screen. You know, the do-do-do, do-do-da-do. They don't have that yet, but now it's stuck in your head. You're welcome. Ben tells Joe he needs a haircut, and I wonder if this was low-key teasing Mike Landon, who never wanted to get his hair cut. When he was a kid, he thought his hair gave him power after he saw Samson and Delilah. In college, some other kids held him down and shaved his head against his will, which must have been a very traumatic experience in more ways than one for poor little Mike. Or Eugene Orowitz, as his name was back then. It was at this point when he lost his ability to throw the javelin, a turning point which was directly responsible for his becoming an actor. Up until that point, his future was set, as he had a scholarship due to his amazing athletic talent. Ben tells Joe that no son of his is going to go around looking like a riverboat gambler, so even though he just got it cut 3 months ago, Pa, and it really doesn't look that long, he is made to stay in town and get it cut. Adam is charged as the eldest brother to make sure it happens. You had one job, Adam. Sheesh. Ben and Joe ride away as Mr. Johnson's wagon comes into town, so soon after that I'm left wondering why they didn't just turn around. I mean, did you notice the covered-up dead body going past you? Flint Johnson, the husband of the murdered woman, flags Adam down and tells him that a prospector saw 3 men leaving his place shortly after the killing. Adam tells Joe to get the sheriff, and right away we find out the sheriff is out of town? I mean, okay, but since we don't have a permanent sheriff yet, we could have just said this deputy was the sheriff. It's small, but my brain catches things like that. Also, I feel like somebody should have already known the sheriff was out of town, but okay, whatever. The deputy is a whiny, useless man named Jeb Clinton. He practically begs Adam and Joe to join the posse, and I think they comply as much to stop the whinging as to keep order. I find it interesting that nothing is said about sending word to Ben and Hoss at home that they're going to be gone for a little while. I imagine they do somehow find out, as we never see either of them looking for their missing family, as you'd normally see when a Cartwright doesn't come home. I just felt like it wouldn't have hurt to have a throwaway line mentioning it. It's fine, though. Joe got out of having his hair cut, and that's what truly matters. 2 members of the posse are a couple of young men named Blue and Buck. They make friends on their mutual trip with a lynch mob. It's very sweet. The Johnsons, Flint and his son, enlist the aid of a tracker named Paiute Scruggs. Right away, Adam and Joe are against this because it seems the man has sort of gained a reputation for leading lynch mobs, and Flint knew that going in. One of the first bright ideas Paiute gets is to stop over at a place called McSween's to rest a while. Adam tells him that this will just make it harder to control the others once they're liquored up, and we see by Johnson's face, that's why he likes it. Get them good and drunk so they don't realize they're committing a murder. Okay, so it appears that we are meant to assume that McSween's is a brothel, as well as a saloon, because 1, they don't call it a saloon, they call it a roadhouse. And 2, it's run by a woman who has a bunch of girls working for her. So yeah, brothel. Of course, they couldn't actually say that on NBC in 1959. Adam and Joe don't even go in, further convincing me that this isn't just a saloon. Yeah, I know Joe went inside Julia Bulette's brothel in an earlier episode, but that was under different circumstances. The other boys also appear to spend the night inside. Draw your own conclusions with that one. We cut to our outlaws, and Blackie proudly says he knows posses pretty well. He says he's ridden on a few, but let's be honest. The majority of his experience comes from being hunted by them. Meanwhile, Paiute spews his poison rather whimsically. Lil McSween basically says in a room full of men how much men suck. Again, jaded madam running a brothel. She doesn't think they're worth a nickel, but she will certainly take all their nickels. The kids in the group, Blue and Buck, are starting to regret joining up with the others, but they seem to feel stuck or maybe still curious. Mr. Johnson's son Billy seems to be feeling a little wary of things as well. Outside the establishment, Joe and Adam have one of their 2 heart-to-heart talks this episode, and Mike steals the scene when Joe says, "Sometimes it's a pretty sorry thing to be a man." This is commentary on many things about this episode, I think, culminating on his internal identity crisis. As George R.R. Martin, author of A Song of Ice and Fire, calls it, the human heart in conflict with itself. The following morning, Adam straight up tells the deputy to be a dang deputy and take charge of the posse. What does this fine lawman do? He goes to Mr. Johnson and tells him what Adam said. Johnson confronts Adam and Paiute sticks his nose into it. Adam tells him that the Cartwrights are used to packing a lot of weight. In other words, they're used to being what Ben referred to in Annie O'Toole as the only stabilizing influence in the territory. Adam slaps the hungover Paiute to the ground after he steps to him, and the deputy does his job for a few minutes. In the middle of the night, Joe hears young Billy Johnson crying, and he tries to comfort him. Billy tells Joe that they are on opposite sides because they want to bring the killers to justice instead of hanging them on the spot. Joe is troubled by this and goes to wake up Adam in the second heart-to-heart talk they have. Joe's internal crisis comes full circle, and he voices it to his big brother. It now becomes a question of morality. If these men are guilty, and they might get away with it like Paiute says, then why not hang them? Adam points out that nobody knows for sure that these men are guilty. The fact is, only one of them is, as we, the audience, already know. As we will see happen many more times in the show, the Cartwrights have to keep even the worst of killers alive to see true justice, no matter how the verdict falls. He tells Joe to get some sleep, and he watches until he sees Joe lay back down. Again, it's small and you might miss it if you're not paying attention. He doesn't close his own eyes again until he's sure that Joe is tucked away back in his own spot. There is dissension in the ranks of the 3 men, meanwhile, and the kid of the group decides it's time to part ways with Blackie and take his chances with the posse because he didn't actually do any killing. Schuster, the man with the kidney condition, decides it's better to stay with Blackie for some reason. The 2 remaining outlaws find some water, and Blackie hogs it all and won't let Schuster have any of it. I'm thinking he probably would have been better off with the posse. At least he might have gotten a quick death. The one who parted ways with the others finds Flint Johnson and his son and says he wants to give himself up. Speaking of a quick death, Johnson shoots him in cold blood and gaslights his son into covering for him with the others. The deputy with the weak spine seems to have given Mr. Johnson the lead again, and Adam calls Johnson out on his lie, guessing that the boy had been trying to surrender. He and Joe bury the body, and Flint gets angry that they want to make it a decent grave. The only two who were ever interested in actually following the law finally agree to leave the posse and seem to wash their hands of whatever happens going forward. We know our Cartwrights better than that, though, and Adam makes it clear once the others are gone that he intends for the two of them to get to the remaining outlaws before the so-called posse does. Both Blackie and Schuster and Adam and Joe figure out that they need to head for water, and they go to a place called Pinnell Springs. And honestly, for years I thought they were all saying Purnell Springs. Alas, it's Pinnell. I will never be able to unhear Purnell, though. There's an abandoned shack near where the water is, and that's where our heroes are waiting when the two outlaws arrive there. Schuster begs Adam to let him have water, and Adam agrees, pushing him toward it. Sadly, our friend with the bad kidneys never gets his drink, as Flint Johnson arrives with the rest of the posse and kills him just as he scoops it into his hands and is raising it to his lips. A sad end for a guy that I rather felt sorry for throughout the episode. Adam and Joe pull Blackie into the shack with them, and the others surround it. While they're inside, Blackie taunts the only two men keeping him alive, and admits that he did the killing, and tells them how he always gets away with whatever he does, because there are never any witnesses. My guy, you do realize that you're currently admitting to murder, yeah? I feel like that's going to carry some weight at his trial. These are Cartwrights that you're telling this to. They aren't just a couple of green saddle tramps. Adam snaps at last and tosses Blackie back onto a cot. Here we get the final part of the conflict which has been building up in Joe. He is angry and wants to hand Blackie over to the posse. For a good long minute, we actually are left to think that he's going to do it. Just that. Just by the look in his eye. Paiute sneaks around the side as Johnson calls out to Adam saying that they're ready to do the right thing. The deputy, good lord, I hope he gets fired after this, agrees to Johnson's lie. The men rush the cabin and knock both Cartwrights out, taking Blackie and attempting to hang him. I'll say here that Adam Williams, who plays Blackie, is very good in both Bonanza episodes that he is in as an evil character, and his performance here when the posse nearly hangs him is gut-wrenching. I don't feel sorry for Blackie at all as a character, but knowing what these men are getting ready to do and having those screams emphasizing it is sickening. What is even more unnerving is watching as Paiute sits there and whittles a piece of wood, as the others are casually committing a lynching. Joe comes through just in time. He helps Adam to his feet and draws down on the others, commanding Blackie to get back into the cabin. He may have meant it when he said earlier that he wanted to just give Blackie to the mob, but when it came down to it, his desire to do the right thing and his priority of taking care of his brother won over. This brings to light my favorite of Joe's qualities, his loyalty to his family and friends. Had he not been there to stop things, Blackie would have been dead, and all that Adam had been trying to do would have been wasted. Joe might still have preferred to turn Blackie over to them, but he didn't. He did the right thing, and in doing so, saved the entire episode. Seeing that there's nothing left to do, Paiute just takes off. He's the epitome of someone who starts a fire and then just walks away from it as it burns. Blue and Buck stick around until Billy, the younger Johnson, decides that seeing a man nearly hanged in front of him was enough, and he walks away, presumably from his father forever. The poor kid has lost a mother to murder, and a father to the vengeance that came from that murder. Ron Haggerty does a great job conveying strained emotion through the episode. Flint says his friendship with the Cartwrights is over, and he walks away. Adam and Joe chide Buck and Blue for having been a part of it, and all that they say is that they just wanted to see the fun. They're young, but for anyone to think this sort of thing was going to be fun is completely beyond me. The episode ends in tragedy, with Adam and Joe taking Blackie back to town. Presumably Flint stands trial for the killing of the other two outlaws, and he may even hang. We never find out. Arthur Honeycutt as Paiute does a good job of speaking in that fanciful way that makes you think he's just strange enough to be effective. I prefer him in later roles as a good guy, but he's fine in this one too. Onslow Stevens as Flint Johnson does a great job at making me believe he's a grieving widower who wants justice for his wife's killers, no matter the cost. Robert Griffin as the inept deputy and John Harmon as Schuster both play the role of rather pathetic, weak men pretty well. As I said earlier, I love this one most for its use of Adam and Joe's relationship. It's really only because Adam was tasked with staying in town until Joe got his haircut that these two were even thrown together in the first place. It could just as easily have been Hoss, and we already know that relationship works. But I'm so glad it wasn't, because we get to see the chemistry between Mike and Purnell. Adam's ability to take charge of things and stay on the course of what is right, along with Joe's emotional conflict of what that right thing is, work so well together, and I love it. We get just enough of Ben and Hoss in that one scene that they have in the beginning that we don't miss them entirely, and these other two get to have a moment in the spotlight by themselves. I highly recommend this one.